Fireside Chat series. Today, we'll be hosting the CEO and co-founder of Fireblocks, Michael Shaulov. The views discussed in this chat are the views of the individuals and not of Fireblocks or ParaFi. Please note that ParaFi is an investor in Fireblocks, and this Fireside Chat is being recorded. We are excited to offer these Fireside Chats and hope that our audience respects the intimacy of the event. While there is no formal duty of confidentiality, we do encourage people to avoid reposting specific quotes or views from the discussion to Twitter or other social media. And as a reminder, we do encourage people to submit questions during the discussion. With that, I will now introduce our speakers for today, Kevin Yedid-Botton, a partner at ParaFi and portfolio manager of our quantitative strategies, and Michael Shaulov, the CEO and co-founder of Fireblocks.
Thank you, Yasmin, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. For those that haven't had the opportunity to know me directly, I'm a partner and portfolio manager at ParaFi for the past 3 years, and I've helped run the firm's quantitative strategies and overseen our technology endeavors, including blockchain infrastructure, trading, analytics, and of course, custody. And a lesser known fact is that I've dabbled in cryptography and computing since my days in college, where I spent most of my time in the physics computing labs, from which I went on to run a high performance computing company. And my fascination for computing, physics, machine learning ultimately carried me to finance. And as the nerdy proverb says, for physicists, the strongest gravitational force is not a black hole, it's Wall Street, and that's where the majority of grads end up. So here we are, and it's a coincidence that we have Michael here as well. I've had the privilege of knowing Michael for 3 years, and when it comes to crypto security and entrepreneurship, Michael is one of the best in class. Michael, starting in the elite 8200 intelligence units in the Israeli army, Michael has really made his way to co-founding one of the leading crypto technology companies today, Fireblocks, which is used by Fortune 500 companies, banks, trading firms, institutions all around the world to safeguard and manage digital assets. And prior to co-founding Fireblocks, Michael was the CEO and co-founder of another security company that was acquired by Checkpoint for almost $100 million in 2015. And it also comes as no surprise that Michael received the Israeli Presidential Excellency Honor, contributions to cybersecurity, and is a graduate of the Ben Gurion University in Israel and holds degrees in computer science and physics. I've personally had the pleasure to know Michael as a friend and colleague for the past 3 years, when ParaFi became one of Fireblocks' first 13 customers, if I'm not mistaken. And under Michael's leadership, Fireblocks has become the pioneer in non-custodial technologies for digital assets and has grown its client base from less than 10 clients when I first met them to now over 1,300 clients today. And Fireblocks handles over $200 billion of volume each month alone, and has approximately 15 to 20% of all global crypto volume flowing to the platform. Earlier this year, ParaFi had the opportunity to invest in Fireblocks' latest financing. And for the past 3 years, our firms have had a long-standing and collaborative relationship, and it's a true pleasure to have him join us today. Michael, welcome to the second ParaFi series.
Kevin, thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for this super kind introduction. Super excited doing it with you. I mean, as you said, I think there is a true partnership and true friendship between us both, and I think a lot of the success that we had was through the relationship we had with ParaFi. I think the feedback that the bidirectional feedback that was shared through the years to help us, I would say, navigate the market and navigate the product. So truly excited to do this podcast with you.
Yeah, no, great to have you. So I'm sure that people that have dialed in or joining us for this chat are just as interested in learning about Fireblocks as they're about learning about you. So I want to start a little bit with your story and how we got here. So I assume that when you were in the intelligence units in the Army, did you ever imagine you were going to go on and be a serial entrepreneur and co-found two highly successful security companies, let alone a crypto company? Tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got here.
Yeah, well, the first, I guess, like, you know, the short answer is probably no, right? I don't think I actually thought that any of this will happen, you know, similar to what you were describing about yourself. You know, clearly my background is highly technical, so I was programming and doing some cybersecurity research back in the days in the Army. And I think, like, you know, even before the Army, clearly the way I got into the Army is that I was programming from the age of 6, right? My dad sort of taught me how to do it. Was doing it, you know, first programming language back then was BASIC, so still remember that. And I think, like, you know, when I graduated, I think what the Army and went to the university, my basic excitement was around sort of building products, right? Or the power that you have from a technology standpoint, and specifically, I would say software, right? The fact that you can think about an idea, you can identify the problem, and sort of, like, you know, very quickly without not a lot of capital. It's like mostly your time or others people's time. You can sort of build a solution for that problem. And I think also on the back of what I've seen, you know, with the internet since I was a kid, the fact that you can distribute this globally so quickly, that was, I think, was what was always exciting for me. And you know, the first couple of attempts, actually before even I became the CEO of Lacoon, which was my previous successful startup, I was actually I've started a few companies that not all of them were unsuccessful. I would actually state that. And back then I was basically mostly the CTO or the VP R&D, and the reason for that is that I was much more, I would say, passionate about, as today, right? Much more, I think, equipped to think about how do you solve the problem from a technical standpoint. I guess at some point I realized that potentially I need to take things much more into my own hands and sort of, like, you know, manage it on the top level, and getting a bit of the business acumen to become also the CEO. But definitely I didn't anticipate to be like a serial entrepreneur, not to say, like, you know, probably not even a one-time entrepreneur.
Yeah, and like from what I gather, so your co-founders, Idan, Pavel, also had similar backgrounds to yours, slightly different but similar. What is it about your background, or, like, you know, their time in the intelligence units, that makes Israeli companies get into crypto? We've seen so many Israeli companies get into crypto. Is, like, you know, I kind of joke, like, is the Mossad secretly Satoshi Nakamoto? Or, like, is the Israeli government happy to you know, have you run with their best technology and, you know, make a commercial? Like, what is the secret recipe that you're having here?
It's a good conspiracy, you know, for sure, right? But I don't think they are that sophisticated, unfortunately, to do that. I mean, you know, for those who are not familiar, I think that the Israeli intelligence community is sort of, like, you know, well known for producing a lot of you know, some of the biggest technology companies in the world, you know, whether it's Checkpoint or Palo Alto Networks. There is a really strong concentration, Sentinel-1. There is a really strong concentration in the cybersecurity domain. There's also, like, you know, a pretty broad concentration outside of the cybersecurity domain. For example, Nova, that became like part of like Facebook, is also there. The guys that created the Xbox sort of like sensors for 3D, they also been with me in the Army. So The reason for that, I would say, is, there are actually like a couple of sort of fundamental reasons that, to be honest, no one yet to figure out the exact recipe of why it's happening, but I think that there are a few key factors there. One is that, for those who are not familiar, basically what happens in like the Israeli army and specifically in those units is that there is a very, very strong screening, right? Basically, it's a mandatory service. So essentially the entire population has to go to the army. And then through that screening, they identify the people that are the most capable from a technical standpoint. They already been doing it since they were kids or teenagers, and they're basically throwing them into this environment. In that environment, they're getting specialized training. And maybe like, the most unique thing is that as someone who is, fairly young, right, 18 or 19 years old, you're being put into an environment that you need to basically solve national security challenges, right? So, your day to day is something like, what you see in I don't know, like a Netflix 24 hours, like in those TV shows that you basically you wake up, you go to your office, there is like an entire crisis and people tell you like, this is like a real situation. I've been in once, they're like, someone got kidnapped and they tell us you need to solve it. We're like, we don't have any solution for that. They're like, we don't pay you not to tell us there is no solution for that. Go and figure it out how we identify where that person is, right? So this is like, maybe this was like, some of the extreme situations, but as an 18-year-old, you basically run into those situations, every once in a while. And what it basically teaches you is that there is no like limit to what you can solve with technology, assuming that you have enough resources, right? So the breakthroughs and the advancements that you're actually seeing there are pretty fascinating in a retrospect, especially the fact that it's being usually done by people that are, pre-college graduation age, right, in the United States. And then they're basically being thrown out, right? So you like at the age of 22, 23, you're being kicked out from your first job, and then you need to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life, right? Now, the unique thing about when you are 22, 23 years old, and you basically have, would say like you don't have family, you don't have any material constraints. I think entrepreneurship is and taking risk, right, is something that is quite feasible, right? And you always know that if you will be unsuccessful, I think that there is also some kind of culture of taking risk, accepting failures. It's actually a culture that exists over there, and therefore it attracts a lot of people. And on top of that, I think that over the last 3 decades, there is kind of like this narrative of very successful stories of people that have been phenomenally successful from those units. They actually come when I was there, for example, Gil Schwade, who was the co-founder of Checkpoint, he came as part of his reserve to give like this kind of fireside chat, and like somehow people feel that this is what they're supposed to do in life. And I guess this is also the reason why myself, Pavel, Idan, many other folks ended up on the path of doing it and doing it multiple times over and over again, regardless if we've been successful or unsuccessful.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess before we get even into Fireblocks, would you say that outside of the general experience, this journey that you described, was there something very specific, something very technical, or a specific skill, or a specific trade skill that you learned from those early days in the Army that has been instrumental in applying it to the technologies that Fireblocks operates today?
So, I mean, I think that generally speaking, yes, right? Because look, our field of specialty, all three of us, was like through the years in cybersecurity, right? And cybersecurity, it's a domain that it's not sort of like, pure science. I think that there is some elements of art to that, and specifically the ability to think like a hacker, right? So when you basically, look at some of the most successful current day cybersecurity companies, what's the main challenge? The main challenge is that you're not basically building some kind of static IT infrastructure. You're not dealing with a static problem, right? It's a dynamic problem because you are not only solving the problem for your client, let's put it like, we're not only solving how the functionality should be working for ParaFi, right? We also need to think about like, the third guy who's potentially sitting right now in North Korea and trying to figure out how they're going to break into the system, right? And this is inherently a cat and mouse game. And what you really need to know is like, just like almost like a good, like, they always say like, the best police or law enforcement are like, also, could have been like, really good criminals, right? Because they can get into the mind of the bad guys. And I think that, having served in a position which like, forces you to do all those things on behalf of law enforcement agencies or government agencies, right? It basically teaches you how to think this way, and also sort of builds a lot of intuition, right? Because I think that there are a lot of things that are theoretical in this space, right? I see it quite a lot when people, in all kind of discussions that we sometimes have with clients, and sometimes even like, with like very high-end clients that they bring PhD cryptographers, are like, oh, in theory, why are you not doing this kind of MPC or doing this kind of MPC? I'm like, look, this is actually not the material discussion over here, because the way that you've seen cyber criminals operating, they're not like reading your white paper about your cryptography and then trying to figure out where is the missing bit. What they're actually going to do, they're going to send you a phishing email, they're going to impersonate that they are interviewing for a job interview, and they're going to take over your password, right? So, and this is not like, I would say like this is the intuition that you build over the years of where are the weak spots, what is like social engineering. And when I look at the history of most of the things that I've done in cybersecurity, I think that intuition has been extremely important into focusing on the real problems rather than building something that is theoretical.
So if I'm not mistaken, part of Fireblocks genesis, the initial idea behind Fireblocks was kind of inspired through a hack that you experienced, or in a prior company. How did the original idea for creating this company that's now Fireblocks start, and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah. So look, I mean, back in like 2017, I was sort of started to be quite interested in blockchain overall, right? And there were two things that basically happened in parallel. I was sort of like reading about it, but honestly, I was reading way more about blockchain than specifically crypto. And then when I was at Checkpoint, basically what happened, my previous company was like one of the best companies in the world in mobile security. We got acquired by Checkpoint. Checkpoint is a huge company, has 100,000 enterprises as clients, and that was basically served us as a very broad platform to sort of distribute the knowledge and build a reputation around it. So we had one of the best research teams. And then the North Koreans, presumably North Koreans, right, Lazarus Group, they hacked in 2017, they hacked 4 exchanges in South Korea, and they were able to steal $200 million worth of crypto. And basically some of the information information about that hack started to circulate among the research community. The attackers specifically used a mobile malware component to bypass some of the two-factor authentication that you had in the path of getting into those systems, and we did the research on that. So my team basically conducted the research on that component, and through that I basically started to read and digest what exactly happened to those 4 exchanges. And what I realized was basically 2 fundamental things. That the first one was that, interestingly enough, that was one of the biggest hacks I've seen. They stole like it was back in the days was $200 million of Bitcoin. Bitcoin was at $1,000, so multiply that by 20, that was like 40 billion right now, I think. Yeah. So that was like a huge amount of money that was stolen at once, and you could actually see that the cyber criminals are pivoting into this kind of asset class. And for those who are not familiar, Lazarus, just a couple of months before they did that hack, they actually hacked Swift, right? So it's not that that was basically their first show, their first appearance, right? They were already well known as sophisticated hackers that were going after financial systems, but they were mainly focusing on traditional financial system. And suddenly you started seeing them pivoting into this something, you know, which was perceived as new, and people were quite surprised why they're doing it. I mean, I think that in a retrospect, it's actually fairly clear. So that basically was the first pull. And as I was starting to read more and more about it, I sort of realized, wow, this is actually going to change the world of finance. I mean, you know, actually for someone who didn't come for Wall Street, as a technologist, I basically started to read about all the implication of it. And I'm like, okay, I mean, in theory, this is what basically groundbreaking. If it would have been implemented tomorrow, all the, say, problems or deficiencies that as a user of the financial system you're familiar with will go away. So that was very intriguing for me. And then what happened was that we started to talk with, you know, other institutional clients, right? So talk with the CEO of Kraken, Genesis, Galaxy, all those folks, and it started to be very clear to us that although there were mainly cold storage solutions or people were using Ledger Nanos, they didn't have any capability to secure transactions end to end, right? So there was some kind of a problem where, okay, when the asset was static, when you wouldn't use the asset, there was already a reasonable know-how on how to secure it. But if you wanted to interact with the asset and build something that is a transactional system where you will either interact with other institutional counterparties or you will interact with a mass group of users, you actually didn't have a good solution for that because you could basically accidentally divert the transaction to a different place. And you know, for various reasons, I think, like, you know, the problem statement over there actually played very well into the expertise that we had, actually not from the Army, the expertise that we learned through the journey with both Lacuna and Checkpoint, and some of our involvement in those new advanced cloud security capabilities, all the stuff we were doing around VPN and encrypted communication, a lot of the stuff that we were doing around mobile security, it all basically sort of like clicked into a one solution that was like, hey, you know, actually we can solve this problem. And it was very clear that this problem was imminent and problematic for at least like what at that point looked as a very small sub-segment of the industry.
And for those that may not be as familiar, Fireblocks is one of the pioneers in what you refer to as MPC, and it's known as multi-party computation, which has become one of the key components of how Fireblocks operates. But maybe for like the broader audience, how would you explain what MPC is, what multi-party computation is, and how that plays into how it powers Fireblocks?
Yeah, so I mean, MPC is in its, I would say, most high-level form is actually a pretty simple concept to think about, right? It's a bit similar to multisig, so people are usually familiar with the concept of multisig, where in order to execute a transaction from a single wallet, right, you basically need multiple parties to sign off on the transaction. Now, originally, what happened was that when, you know, several years, well, actually like 4 years after Bitcoin was invented, this kind of concept came to Bitcoin, but that concept in the form of multisig came in the form that you actually have, let's say, 3 private keys that govern the wallet, and 2 out of them are required to sign the transaction, so we call it 2 out of 3, right? And if 2 of the keys are broadcasting the transaction to the blockchain, the nodes will basically propagate the transaction. The problem with that concept was that it sort of depended on the logic of the blockchain. So it worked well for Bitcoin. It didn't exist in Ethereum, so people use smart contract that had, unfortunately, catastrophic results with some of the hacks over there. And generally speaking, every different blockchain had a different implementation or had no implementation for that, right? So MPC basically took it one level down to the cryptography, right? At the concept of at the core of the cryptography, you essentially have the signature algorithm, which is currently being used as ECDSA or EDDSA. Those are the elliptic curve algorithms that are creating the signature itself. And the MPC concept, essentially what it allows us to do is to compute that algorithm in a distributed way under that kind of like threshold formation. So what it means that I have some kind of like secret share, right? It's basically some kind of secret random number. Kevin has, some secret random number, and potentially multiple other people have that secret, their own individual secret random number, and we can decide initially what is the threshold in the wallet, so how many of us need to participate in creating a signature. And what we're doing, we're basically computing this elliptic curve in a distributed way, but without giving each other the secret share that each of us own, right? So very similar to multisig, but it's basically generic across all the different blockchains, and it's basically the logic itself is being done on chain, off chain. Sorry. The advantage of that is really that it had basically it has like basically 3 significant advantages, right? One, in the concept of security, you sort of eliminate the single point of failure or the single point of compromise, right? Because, for example, the way that Fireblocks provisions it is that we have servers that are running on the cloud, we have mobile devices that belongs to the user, it actually being split between multiple entities that they don't have the same governance, and therefore there is way less risk of an attacker being able to compromise all of those individual endpoints at once, right, without this being detected. And second of all, it also protects you from internal collusion, because generally speaking, you need multiple people, and in this case, actually multiple entities that are unrelated from a corporate governance standpoint to sign on the transaction, right? So this is like from a security standpoint, and then from an operational standpoint, it works across all the different blockchains. And in addition to that, if you basically need to now switch the quorum, so basically change it from, let's say, 2 out of 3 to 5 out of 6 people, it doesn't require you to move to another wallet, which the traditional multisig requires you to do, right? So that's, I'd say, in a high level, the MPC.
Yeah, that's very helpful, and it was certainly something that when we were diligencing, we were one of the first DeFi users. We had this problem. We had to move assets around. We couldn't rely on traditional cold storage technologies, and that's when we met back in 2019, 2018. And as I think about it, Fireblocks is now in the pole position as like the leading non-custodial technology provider for digital assets. But if my memory doesn't fail me, in 2019, Fireblocks wasn't quite the hottest solution out there. Few people didn't, most people didn't understand it. Like I think it was hard to get clients, it was hard to get funding. What changed? Like, did you like hire a better marketing firm all of a sudden, and then things changed, or what really catapulted Fireblocks into the spot that it is today?
Yeah, no, I do agree that it was crap. So like we can say, in that point in time, and I actually like always tell my team here that I think a lot of our team joined us in the last 18 months or so there during the bull market where everything was going through the roof. And I like always tell her, like, you need to remember we started this company in way into like sort of the plunging prices of 2018. You guys like haven't seen the worst of it, right? So the reality is that I think in the early days I think there were basically two things that happened, right? One, we had a very strong thesis that eventually interactions will be on-chain, right? And we built a technology that was inherently designed for on-chain. I mean, I don't think we call it DeFi at that point in time, but it was very clear for us that the beauty of crypto is going to be at the usage of it, right? That people will move those assets, otherwise, who cares, right? Back in 2018, 2019, that wasn't the narrative, right? People didn't care about moving it. People were buying those tokens and they were basically putting the tokens in cold storage. So I would say that, I don't know, like 8 out of 10 calls that we will have with prospect clients, they will tell us, I'm not interested because I have everything in my Zappo accounts, or I have everything in BitGo, or I have everything in Coinbase. And people just didn't care that much about that problem. The second thing that people were using, which was, I would say also like, a narrative at that point, they would use Ledger Nanos or all kind of consumer devices that they thought that it's reasonable to use because they were all in the office. And I remember walking into a client and they had a Ledger Nano with $80 million on it. One guy had the Ledger Nano, another guy had the cable, a third guy had the first half of the passcode, and the other guy had the second half of the passcode. And every time that they would do a transaction, they would all regroup from the computer. One guy will bring a cable, the other. So it was a process, but it worked, right? When they did it, and if you can buy a device for $70, then why would you now switch to an enterprise solution that uses MPC, right? I think what happened basically almost in parallel was a couple of trends, right? The first one is really that as the market started to change, it became, I think now it's clear because everything is DeFi, everything is NFT, right? But the market started to move into a much more dynamic market where people were trading. If you were not trading, you were basically dead in the water. Then it became much more DeFi, which I think you guys helped us to really understand that trend very early on and position ourselves properly against it. So that was basically one part of the of the trend where everything became liquid and on-chain, and even the clients that in theory they were buying tokens, like all kind of like VC, that were in theory in the hold position of the assets, they understood that they need to participate in the protocols, right, with the tokens that they have to actually be able to generate, whether yield or governance or all those things. And clearly all the more interesting use cases around payments, arbitrage, all those things really required moving the assets. So that became, I would say, I think we bet correctly that this is where the industry is heading, right? And the second thing that actually happened was COVID, right? So, I remember we had, I don't want to mention that client because now they're one of our biggest clients, but the first couple of meetings we had with them back in 2019, we were like 15 people. There were 15 people. Now they have like 800 people. They were like, oh, why would you pay for your solution? I don't know, like we could use Dropbox. There was like some kind of really weird arguments of like, why would you even need this, right? And then COVID hit, right? And they couldn't be in the office and they had to do all their operations. And this is, I think, where our solution really shined, right? Where you could, because it was mobile first, it was cloud first, you didn't have to rely on everybody being physically in the office, coordinating some kind of weird protocol around getting the transaction out, that everything was basically distributed by secure, right? This is where people started to come to us because they were like, oh, like I can't operate right now in this environment with this physical one device that I had in the office, and this is where everything started to change. So, I think that since, I would say, March, April 2020, as they always say, like, there is the COVID was like this kind of K kind of recovery. We were definitely on the upper side of the K in terms of we were like the Zoom for crypto. If you had to operate, we were the solution for you.
So, and it was, I think there's no coincidence that last year you saw this large banks, BNY Mellon, Silicon Valley Bank, become investors, but also become clients of Fireblocks to operate their digital asset businesses. I think since then, you've seen even larger fintechs and larger banks become additional clients. Why are these traditional old school institutions choosing to go with one of the most tech forward companies out there, and most importantly, also go the self-custody route versus handing the keys to a third party?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, like everything in crypto, if you wait enough time, I think the answer becomes clear, right? I think that when those solutions were made a year ago, there was definitely a lot of pull and push, right, around the narrative of self-custody or sub-custody or third-party custody, and we argued that self-custody is the way to go because you're in control of the assets. You don't have counterparty risk to any third party. You have the operational control, and you also unleash yourself from a competitive advantage, right? Because you can build whatever you want. You're not confined by regulatory restrictions, operational restrictions, technology restrictions of the third party. You basically, you might not like operate the bits and bytes of the infrastructure, but on top of Fireblocks, you can go up and down the stack as much as you want. You can, you guys are familiar with it, right? You can use the most high-level SDKs that you can send a transaction with one line of code. And if you want, on the same wallet, the same address, you can go as deep as using our row signing capability that can allow you to put any arbitrary transaction that you will encode yourself and do whatever you want against that wallet. So we would basically pitch to them that. On the other side, I would say that the sub-custodians would basically pitch that, look, this is complicated. You guys understand nothing about crypto. To go with Fireblocks is crazy because, there will be a lot of regulatory complexities for you that you don't know how to navigate, and we already figured it out. And I think that, to be quite candid, I think that a year ago, people, maybe there was like, 50-50 split between people that would go with sub-custodians and direct custody or self-custody like us. I think that, interestingly enough, fast forward to today, after, basically the clarification that Coinbase put in their Q1 earning around the question around what will be the situation of the asset under custody in the case of bankruptcy, right? And fast forward to, and at that point, that looked like a completely theoretical argument that even that, as was mentioned through the Twitter storm that followed that reporting, it looks like this is just like something theoretical that the SEC forced them to put there. Fast forward 3 months later, that became the most important topic that is currently being discussed in the crypto sphere. Or now, after Celsius filed for Chapter 11, Voyager filed for Chapter 11, Three Arrows filed for Chapter 11, the question of what happens to your assets and what the counterparty risk you have, now the question of not your keys, not your Bitcoin, becomes very, very real. And if you are, I think, a big institution or a small institution, right? I think you're thinking you're thinking a lot about this problem and how this problem is going to manifest itself through the selection of your vendors. And I think the beauty with Fireblocks and players like Fireblocks, right, that are offering this kind of direct custody, is that it's almost like, you know, you benefit from both worlds, right? In your day-to-day, you actually don't really feel any challenge in terms of of operations. And in some regards, it's actually even simpler to probably operate with Fireblocks and some of those sub-custodian solutions. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, because you're the user of many of them. But in reality, if, excuse my French, if the shit will hit the fan, right, and the basically, like, you know, the entire, like, say, like, you know, we will go down and will disappear tomorrow morning, our clients don't have any counterparty risk to us. They can pull the backup key, they can take all the assets, and they can pull them into the next custodial in line, or they can put it in their ledger nano, right? They don't need to go to court. They don't need to wait for the bankruptcy attorneys to figure out who those assets belong to, right? And I think that at the end of the day, this is really the beauty of crypto, right? The fact that you can actually solve a lot of those counterparty risks that are unsolvable in the traditional space. There is a much better solution for those problems with crypto.
And a lot of that resonates, which is why we're such strong believers in and users of Fireblocks. I think certainly, you know, the complexity and technicalities of dealing with cryptographic content, I think, is a challenge that will remain. But I also see the power that the Fireblocks platform as a general cryptographic engine is allowing a lot of these new clients to build on top of, which takes me to the last point that I want to make before we go into Q&A, which is recently I saw that Fireblocks launched a campaign around its Web3 engine. And many skeptics out there believe that Web3 is just a bunch of crypto enthusiasts reinventing the traditional Web2 stack. But you know, I tend to believe that that's not the case. But I'm curious to get your opinion on how is Web3 different from Web2, and why it is so important to not just to what Fireblocks is building, but to the industry as a whole.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that look, I mean, I also, like, always sometimes, like, you know, find difficult to exactly put what is the difference between Web3 and crypto in general, because in some ways it's basically the same concept, right? And the main question is, how can we move something that is valuable, right, on the rails and at the speed of internet, right? That's basically, I think, the value of crypto, which is basically, you know, the internet is arguably decentralized, right? It doesn't have any borders. You know, it moves at the speed of electrons, which is basically the speed of light. And, you know, we know that money and value doesn't move, right, in the traditional system, doesn't move that way, right? So the fact that crypto was able to solve it, let's say, for Bitcoin, and then it was able to solve it for a tokenized dollar like PAX or USDC, right? The next question that comes in is like, okay, what are the other assets that we can apply it on, right? And that becomes actually like a fairly interesting philosophical question that I think at the sort of like far end of that question, there is basically the intellectual property and the ownership on data, right? And for me, a lot of the use cases or the emerging use cases around the Web3 is right now, when in the last, maybe like in the last 20, 30 years, most of the data that was generated is effectively digital data, right? Doesn't matter if it's your blog post, it's the photo that you upload to Instagram, it's the video that you upload to TikTok. All that data is, you know, some form of proprietary data that in theory belongs to you because you're the creator, the individual, but effectively once you upload it to that platform, it no longer belongs to you, it belongs to that platform. And this is how Web2 behaves. I think that unlocking the ownership of that and bringing that ownership back to the user is, you know, in theory, a very fundamental shift to the way that web and society work online. plays into a lot of those narratives around metaverse and so on. But I think just like even without all that, right, that itself is a pretty powerful idea that has a lot of implications for a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot of innovation going on. I think the most obvious use case that sort of picked up was applying it for JPEGs, right, and doing it for NFTs. But clearly, as we starting to see the propagation of it, a lot of the new stuff that are coming in is, how do I do it in gaming? How do I do it in social media? How do I do it for all those creators that are generating either music or videos or whatever, right? And I don't know what's the end over there. I heard a lot of really interesting ideas. I think the creation over there, I mean, if we had to figure out what we're going to talk about in this interview, or the fact that half of my team will be working on NFTs and DeFi right now, I wouldn't be able to predict it a year ago. And I think in a very similar way, I don't think I can predict where this thing will be in a year from now. But what I do know is that it attracts so much talent and so much creativity that if I need to bet, I think this is like definitely an area where there will be, because of the conceptual implications and the amount of people that are creative, that are working on making really interesting stuff over there. This is the frontier that will be the evolution of what you can do on the internet.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and many people are wondering what that means from a regulatory standpoint. And I want to move on to the Q&A, which we received a couple questions. And one question that was asked a couple times was really about regulation. Obviously, there is the SEC custody rule that says that securities must be custodied with a traditional qualified custodian. We know crypto has never really fit that definition quite well. Even the traditional custodians themselves are not what you would call a qualified custodian under the custody rule, and potentially neither is Fireblocks. And we know that you've put together an amazing team, one of the former SEC chairs, a senior board. And well, how is Fireblocks approaching the regulatory environment when it comes specifically to the topic of the custody of what could potentially be securities?
Yeah, I mean, we're spending a lot of time with regulators all the time. So we spend a lot of time with U.S. regulators, global regulators, Singapore, Germany, Switzerland, and so on. Interesting enough, by the way, just like an interesting observation that I just learned recently. For example, the QC rule is only U.S. Basically only applies in the U.S. For example, in Singapore, MIS doesn't have that requirement, right? As a RIA, a registered fund in Singapore, you don't actually have a requirement to use something that is like a QC status, right? So for example, in some of those jurisdictions, we actually working, and also in the US, right, we are working with the regulators to amend some of those rules to reflect what we believe is actually the right security procedures, because fundamentally what we learned, and I think that there is a broad agreement on that also from the regulators, is the fact that you have some kind of license that you achieved 50 years ago or 250 years ago doesn't mean that you have the fiduciary capability to protect digital assets in the best way possible, right? So as an RIA, actually the fact that you are selecting potentially someone who has a better license vs someone who has the better technology to protect your assets for your LPs is potentially puts you in a fiduciary conflict, right, in terms of what you're supposed to do. So we are working with the regulators to, I think, resolve some of the ambiguity over there, and I think that the regulators are generally very interested to learn how they should be amending those regulations. And I think that in the just maybe talk about some kind of like future state, I think in the next 18 months probably there will be changes to how this is being viewed. In the meantime, right, there are situations or projects in which inherently we are tokenizing securities, right? So when we're working with different asset managers, and what we put for that is that we have quite a few qualified custodians, right? Whether it's Bank of New York Mellon, that hopefully going to pending regulatory approval, hopefully will go live later this year. And whether it's Prime Trust, Cross River, other folks that are using our technology both in the U.S. and outside the U.S. That if it's like very clear that there is that requirement, we are able to basically use them as the infrastructure to do this kind of setup where you have the QC umbrella.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I want to touch a little bit on the current market environment. Certainly, you mentioned like 2020 was a K-shaped kind of like recovery with a strong inflection point. How would you describe the past, year to date 2022, specifically the past 2 months? Have you seen a decline in institutional interest? Have you seen a decline in transaction volume? How has the current pricing environment affected your roadmap as well as your business?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a pretty significant shift, right? But I think, look, I think that strategically, actually, that shift is possible, but positive, and I'll explain why. So, where do we see the biggest decline at the moment from a pipeline standpoint? So maybe just, as a business, I would say we do benefit from increase in volume and increase in price like everyone else, but this is actually sort of maybe like the second or third derivative of implication on our business. Most of our business is actually driven by expansion of the market from new participants, right? This is, I would say, the leading indicator that Fireblocks is tracking, in terms of both pipeline and people that we engage in. And what we've seen in the last 2 months is actually 2 or 3 very interesting narrative. The first one is that we've seen a pretty strong decline, not surprisingly, from crypto trading businesses, right? So there are less hedge funds, there are less market makers, maybe prop trading firms, there are less DeFi funds that are being set up. I guess, for a lot of, I think, obvious reasons, momentum, investors and so on, that basically whether they are less people think that it's a good idea, or less people are able to raise funding for setting up the vehicle. So that's definitely trending down high double digits, in terms of what we're seeing. On the flip side, where we see a lot of uptick is in like three core domains. The first one is TradFi. I mean, generally speaking, those guys are just keeping with their momentum. I don't think that the lead indicator for them is actually the regulatory clarity that becomes better and better, and they are continuing on that path. The second one is that we've done quite a lot recently with payment providers. We've Checkout and a few others that are going to be announced fairly soon. And over there, it's mostly around stable coins, and we've seen this picking up. And the third one is really this kind of, a broad bucket of Web3 projects that are increasing, and I just think that a lot of people are coming to build.
And how would you say that the current pricing environment affects your roadmap? In other words, you've usually looked at the market as a source of inspiration for what solutions you need to build. You usually have been a solution-driven business. Now you have the maturity of the asset class. You've seen some of the critical pieces of infrastructure come into place. You certainly have, I know, personally speaking, I know your team has spent a lot of time building as many blockchain integrations as possible. Some that have worked for a long time, some that have had short-term lifespans. But as you think about your engineering and product roadmap, what are you looking to do? And as a add-on to that question is, where do you get your inspiration from? Are you reading something interesting? Are you like, are you gathering inspiration from a particular area to influence the Fireblocks roadmap?
So I think most of our inspiration has always been to talk with clients, right? And I think, like, just my view is that when you read stuff, or when you read all kind of analyst analysis, right, that they publish, it's always too late, right? What you need is to be in front of clients, in front of as many clients as possible. Identify, I would say, like, the forward leading ones. You guys are clearly, at the top of that category, that we enjoy interacting, brainstorm and understand where they're heading, and from there to sort of derive the inspiration or the insight, right? This unique insight of where the market is heading. And I think that, just to your previous comment, for example, like the Web3 engine, I think that as we're going deeper and deeper into that category and spending more and more time with those clients, I think that we are realizing more and more what are the challenges over there. And to be quite honest, yeah, like the solution that we have is probably good for the requirements over there for day one, but clearly there is so much influence that is currently derived from that category on our product roadmap, which is quite amazing, because you actually learn that, yeah, it's no longer, let's develop 50 different blockchains. It's actually, scale, it's like all this ZK, high throughput, layer 2, millions of wallets, those requirements, user experience requirements. So there are a lot of really interesting things that are popping up when you spend enough time and you basically understand the objections and the challenges that those people have, that influence the roadmap. I can also say, like, same, by the way, when you talk about TradFi and what they want to do. I just, like Jay, think as much you spend with people and you intimately try to understand what their business is and learn. I mean, that just, first of all, fascinating, because you have the opportunity to learn something new every day, but also it just sort of pushes your imagination, like, in terms of what can you do and how you can even, like, improve it farther, sometimes beyond of what even they think is feasible.
Yeah, well, Michael, I want to thank you for your time. It's been great having you join us for this chat series, and thanks to everyone who also dialed in to listen to Michael's insights and perspectives. And that's all we have for today. So thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It was, real pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate everything, and appreciate the partnership.
Yeah, if anyone has questions to follow up on, we're happy always to answer them via IR@ParaFi Capital, ParaFi.com. Thanks everyone.